Hey Austin, how you doing? I'm just sitting here with your aims, and I'm going to give you some feedback now. So I would say, I have a few specific comments and a couple of general comments, but I'm just going to give you these as if you were my PhD student, and you were this was a grant you were going to write to do your dissertation or something, and I'm going to give you feedback in the spirit of let's make this as strong as possible so that you get the money and your life will be easier and stuff, and it'll be good for your career and so forth. So that's sort of the mindset with which I read the grant, and I know we met and talked about this, but that's the whole mindset I have is, let's just make this as good as it can be. And it can always be better, so it's a very rigorous, very difficult process writing a grant. There's always things I'll say, to every student, a lot of things that, it can be better. So, okay, so I'm remembering back to our conversation. I really like your idea, or ideas of, studying something to do with the retina and schizophrenia and stuff, or something to do with contrast sensitivity and schizophrenia. Those are both very good areas where there's more information that can be learned, and it could be helpful. So that's good. I think the main issue here that I would say is you never really say what you're going to do in the specific aims here, and that is really the point of this page. You want to, yes, say why it's important and stuff, and sometimes you can kind of open with that and talk about, schizophrenia is a really bad thing, and we amazingly don't understand this one thing about it, and it will be a really big deal if we understand it. That's good. But then you go into where you list the specific aims. Specific aim 1, to determine blah, blah, blah. Specific aim 2, blah, blah, blah. And that's where you articulate, this is what I'm going to do in this study. And the reader's like, oh, that's what you're going to do to answer the question, to fill the gap in the literature. I see. And you did not do that yet. I know these ideas are in your brain because we had this conversation in my office, but you did not write those ideas down on the paper. So that is your main task at this point, I would say, that you need to do. So for the first one, you say to determine the structural / biological elements of the retina and its impact on visual impairments in schizophrenia. Okay, so but before you say what the hypothesis is, you should probably say, I'm going to do this so that I can determine what's going on in the retina. And you need to specify what technology are you going to use to measure the retina. Remember, we looked at the paper together by Steve Silverstein, and there were a couple different ways you can look at the retina, and which one are you going to use? And remember, Steve did do that review paper, and it looked like some people had looked at the retina. So what are you going to do that's different than what someone else has already done? What do we already know about the retina? You need to say that. You need to acknowledge that there are some things we know about the retina and schizophrenia. So what are you going to be figuring out that's new? So that's for the first aim. The second aim, to examine the pharmacological correlation between contrast perception and the retina. Okay. That one I probably can infer based on our conversation what you mean, but it's still not clear enough for the aims page. You need to say you need to articulate what you're going to do in that study. So what we talked about, I'm going to have healthy controls, take antipsychotic medications and stuff. And so you didn't say that. You just said, I'm going to examine the correlation, which isn't quite the right word, actually. You want to rephrase that. You're not looking at a correlation. A correlation is where you have an x-axis and a y-axis, and you look at the relationship between two variables. That's not what you're talking about here, I don't think. You're talking actually about an experiment, which is much more powerful than correlation. So own your strength there of your design, and say you want to do an experiment where you're giving controls antipsychotics and seeing what it does to their contrast sensitivity. Now, one thing to be careful of there is contrast sensitivity. Let's say you have your group of controls, you give them antipsychotics, and you see what it does, and then you have them do a task exactly like Yu Chen had in that 2003 paper that you cited. and you see, lo and behold, their contrast sensitivity gets worse or something, you don't know where in the brain that happened. You just know that they got worse. So antipsychotic medications, I mean, how are they administered? They're administered through the mouth. You eat them. And then they digest in your belly. And then how do they get to their brain? Well, they flow through the blood. So there's blood that is in your belly that like absorbs the nutrients and stuff from whatever you eat. And that process, so the antipsychotic is going through the entire body. It's going into their hands. It's going into their skin, like the blood into their skin. It's going certainly into their retina. And it's also going into their entire brain. So you don't know why. Like it could be something, it's probably one of the latter two. It's probably the retina or the brain. But you don't know which would be responsible for a change in contrast sensitivity, because contrast sensitivity doesn't, seeing contrast doesn't just happen in the retina. It also happens, there's additional processing, a lot of additional processing that has to happen in the brain for you to see contrast. So you just want to be more careful with your wording there. And you don't know if it's the retina that you're discovering. You could look at contrast sensitivity and see if taking an antipsychotic messes up a control. That would be a good thing to do. Okay, couple other. So that was my major points that you want to make clearer. So you should say something like, I will do an experiment using an experimental design. I will test controls, healthy individuals without schizophrenia with antipsychotic medication and without, and I will see what it does to their contrast sensitivity. Basically, you could say something like that. And then you specify your hypothesis. And you could say, I will also do the same thing with people with schizophrenia. First episode patients who have never taken an antipsychotic before, I'll test them on contrast sensitivity, and then I'll wait until they've received antipsychotic treatments, and then I'll test them again. You know, these would be things you could potentially do, but you need to articulate those. I think you could simplify your shtick a little bit and maybe drop the first aim if you want to do. This is just an option. And you could make two aims of, aim one is testing the controls on antipsychotics and not. And aim two is medication naive schizophrenia patients in their first episode, seeing how they do on antipsychotics. And then, or on contrast sensitivity before antipsychotics, and then contrast sensitivity after antipsychotics. So that would be, an aim one is with controls, aim two is with first episode schizophrenia patients, and that's it. That would be a little more focused. Right now you have the whole thing with the drugs, but then you have this sort of unrelated retina thing. And it's not unrelated, but it's less related. So that's something you could do. There's a few things you could rephrase and stuff here. Like one thing is that you use the word neurotypical participants to refer to healthy controls. That's really a word from the autism literature. It's not something that is used in psychiatry when talking about schizophrenia, as compared with schizophrenia or as compared with depressed patients. So just say healthy controls, healthy participants. Yeah, I think that's probably good feedback for now. If you can try to do that, make those aims clear. I'd say the second paragraph you have there, this one here, is really not necessary. It's not really adding anything to your aim, so you could just remove it and then use that space to be clear about what Yu Chen found in 2003 and what we know about contrast sensitivity and what we don't. Articulate that, because you haven't really said what we know and what we don't about contrast sensitivity and schizophrenia. So yeah, I would try to be a little more specific. That's a really general paragraph about schizophrenia in general, but it's not really helping you too much, I don't think. You could maybe have one sentence about that at the very beginning, but it's kind of like you were pretty specific in the first paragraph and then you zoomed out, which is kind of unusual. Usually you would start broad and funnel down to something specific, but you sort of did the opposite and it felt kind of weird. So I think you can just get rid of that paragraph pretty much. Okay, that's probably good. Why don't you try to do your best on that for a while and let me know if you need to talk about it anymore. So good luck.